And a very warm welcome to this digital conference organized by the Forest Stewardship Council, organized by FSC Germany. My name is Maria Grunwald. I'm a German journalist and I will be your host today. And please, on the very beginning, please make sure that you choose the correct language. You can choose between English or Portuguese. And to switch between languages, please find below your video window here in Zoom, below your video window, you will find the button called Interpretation in English, or in German, it's the button called Dolmetschen. You can also check, it's an icon of a world. So actually, if you click on that, there you can choose your language, either Portuguese or English. Please do that and make sure that you can understand that. That would be wonderful. Let's check the main idea of this conference. FSC Germany really wants to offer a very honest, a very open, a very critical discussion about advantages and disadvantages of FSC certification. This conference includes 6 different discussion rounds, and we focused on different regions of the world. On previous events, we discussed about FSC certification in the Congo Basin, in the Ukraine, in Russia, and today we're going to talk about FSC certification in Brazil. And please note, we will focus on FSC certified forest plantations, most of them monoculture tree plantations, especially eucalyptus plantations, and they are located not exclusively, but mainly in the Atlantic forest. And of course, the Atlantic forest is located along the Atlantic coast of Brazil. And just to make clear that we're not talking here about an intact forest, experts say that up to 80, even up to 90% of that original Atlantic forest is destroyed or has been lost, and that happened already last century. And this original Atlantic forest has been replaced with secondary forest, with vast soy cultivation fields, also with areas for extensive cattle ranching, and with monoculture tree plantations. The title of our discussion round today, and the main question for today is, are forest plantations green deserts, as many environmental activists say, or can forest plantations also be a good contribution to a sustainable land use, to a sustainable forest use? That's the question for today. And before I introduce our wonderful speakers, here are some rules of the game. If you followed us on previous events, or if you already watched us, then you already know those rules, but I have to repeat them here once again. We have about 90 minutes in total, and it will be my job for the first 45 or let's say 50 minutes, it will be my job to interview our speakers. And after 45 or 50 minutes have passed, then it will be your turn. Then you can ask questions, and please do so, because this is called a discussion. So actually we need your questions. Please feel free to ask questions. How can you do that? You have 3 different ways to do that. You can write an email, and now I switch to German because it's a German email address. You can write an email to the German email address Konferenz@fsc-deutschland.de. You can write an email and the organizers will monitor that email and send it to me. You can also use the button F and A in German here in Zoom. Please look below your video window, there's a button called F&A, or in English, it could be Q&A. Please use that button, and there you can put your question. I can check that question immediately, and I will monitor those questions. So that's your second option to send in questions. And you have a third one, which I think is a very cool one, because actually you can also use the button raise your hand in English, raise your hand. In German, the button is called Hand heben, Hand erheben. Use that button, and if you use that button, then actually the organizers will monitor that. They will open up the microphone for you, and that means you will be able to ask your question all by yourself. We will hear your voice, and I think that's a pretty cool option too. So let's see if you are not afraid, and if you use also that option. That would be very interesting, I think. Thanks very much. These are all rules of the game. And now I would like to introduce our wonderful speakers of today. And I start this time. I don't start with a woman. I start with a man, but I think that's okay. I start with Dirk Riestenpat. He's joining us from Berlin. He's a forester, and he works at the State Forestry Office of Berlin. And since 2011, he's chairman of FSC Germany. He has visited many forest plantations in South America, basically in Chile and in Argentina, and although not in Brazil, but he's visited other plantations there in South America. And he says that the biggest problem with FSC certification in Brazil is that there is little acceptance for certified forest plantations, because it is not clear if these plantations really have an environmental value. We will check on that later. Thanks for being here, Dirk Riestenpat. Next, our next speaker is Amanda de Andrade. She's joining us from Rio. I hope that's still correct. I think it's Rio. Yes, we can't see it, but she told me it's Rio. Very nice city. She's a marine biologist that became interested in forestry issues already many, many years ago. And she's a private consultant working with NGOs and forest-based companies. She's member of the Environmental Chamber at FSC Brazil. So she represents the environmental board. And she says she loves that voluntary work because she's convinced that FSC is a good thing. And why does she think so? Because for her, the most important achievement of FSC in Brazil is to provide guidelines for responsible forest management systems where commercial plantations can become drivers for conservation. I shall repeat that. Commercial plantations can become drivers for conservation. We will talk about that later. Thanks very much for being here, Amanda. And I also present Victoria Valuz Rizo. She's joining us from Bahia. And she's a lawyer and a journalist, and she is CEO of 2-Tree Consultoria e Medio Ambiente, which is a consultant firm that advises smallholders, especially farmers, she told me, in environmental issues. And she helps basically also to meet environmental standards, and she also helps to meet FSC criteria. Victoria also volunteers for FSC, and she represents the Economic Chamber of FSC Brazil. And she says the biggest problem with FSC certification in Brazil is to be recognized by the national consumer market. That's the biggest problem. She wants more recognition. Thanks very much for being here. We will focus on that later. And then I also say hello and a very warm welcome to Eunice Brito de Aquino. She's also joining us from Bahia, and she's a lawyer and CEO of EDNO. That is a consulting firm with the aim to establish relationships between traditional communities and forest-based companies. Eunice also focuses a lot on human rights issues. She's a member of the Social Chamber of FSC Brazil. So we have representatives from the 3 chambers of FSC, the Social Chamber, Economic, and Environmental. And she says the biggest problem for FSC certification in Brazil is to implement practices of free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous people and traditional communities nationwide. So she wants there a better consent. And last but not least, we say hello to Thomas Fattoya. He is, I'm sorry for that, he is joining us, of course, from Berlin. He's a social scientist and philologist, and he lived more than 20 years in Brazil, and that's why he chose today to speak in Portuguese, because he says, I like it much more than English, and I'm better in it than in English. And he has been working for different German organizations there in Brazil, for example, for the German Development Service, where he was head of its rainforest program. Today, Thomas Fattoya lives as a private consultant and author in Berlin, and he is board director of COBRA. What is COBRA? COBRA is a network of different organizations, mainly church-related organizations, and they work in Brazil. They have projects in Brazil. And he says, putting effort in FSC certified forest plantations is putting effort into a wrong model, into a wrong strategy. Thomas, I would like to start with you. Why is it a wrong strategy or a wrong model?
Sim, vou falar em português, já foi anunciado. Então,
I will speak in Portuguese, like I have said. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm speaking from Berlin. I'm very far away from Brazil. It's very difficult to be in Brazil in this situation. Last year was the first time that I spent 1 year away from Brazil after 30 years. All these years I've been in Brazil. And like you have mentioned, I lived many years in Brazil, and for me it's very, very difficult with this situation, with the pandemic. And in 2019, many important projects became very complicated, and we had the IPCC. These two had a model of agriculture and forestry that say that there is no future for these models. We are having a lot of challenge to go through. One of them is the climate changes, which was and we have to coping with these challenges together, climate change and these other environmental problems. But these monocultures are they are not the appropriate answer for the future. I know they use it in Brazil, and I know in Germany sometimes, and they leave the model of the monocultures in Germany. I think the monoculture of planting trees, that happens a lot in Brazil, and I know there is a model, this model exists in Brazil, and they made a lot of efforts to improve, but the model they are using today, for me, has no future. And it should be reviewed, this plantation model for trees. And the initial presentation was mentioned that the forest that was planted, they were planted in the logging part. In Germany, we always talk about the centralization in the Amazon and the forest, and we do have to protect the forest. But we think the question is more complex than everything.
Yeah, of course, I can understand it's more complex.
When we are talking about the eucalyptus plantation, they were implementing these models in the regions of the Cerrado, and there is a lot of eucalyptus plantation in the Cerrados in Brazil. In many of these portion of the plantation, they also implemented another rich systems for this type of plantation. And they were considering these areas of no value. And in the Cerrado, they were not recognized as a valuable region. Nowadays, the Cerrado is a very important ecological area, and it's also a very important area for traditional communities and population. And when we talk about monoculture and eucalyptus plantation, we have to take in consideration the existing ecosystems. And we need to recognize that plantation of trees and monocultures, I think.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Fattoya, I think I will have to jump in because, sorry that I interrupt, but of course we want to have a discussion here. So of course, I think your point of view is pretty clear. You are against forest plantations, especially monoculture tree plantations, eucalyptus plantations, and you say that's the wrong model, and you also say maybe they are not perfect to fight climate change. Let's hear the other side. So let's ask Amanda, because Amanda represents the environmental board of FSC Brazil. And Amanda, sorry, just before I get your question, because we already had some questions in the chat, I just have to repeat that some people from the audience asked how they can follow us and how can they switch the language. So I will just say it again. Under your video window here in Zoom, there's a button. In German, this button is called Dolmetschen. In English, the button is called Interpretation. And if you click on that button, then you will be able to switch or choose languages. And then you can choose either English or either Portuguese. I hope that helped a bit because people were asking already. Okay, sorry, Amanda. Now we go with the question. Amanda, of course, I know that you say, no, it's not such a wrong model, the forest plantations. So let's understand a little bit better why you say that such forest plantations, especially monoculture tree plantations, you say they have an environmental value. What kind of a value do they have? Can you explain that a little more to us?
Sure. I'm going to talk in English. When we talk about monocultures in Brazil, we have to take into consideration a landscape approach. So if you look at the landscape of where these plantations have been implemented, you'll see that the way that they've been implemented in Brazil, and of course the way that they are being managed today, provides a coexistence between a commercial plantation and conservation efforts. So what we have today is that the planted tree industry is contributing to the recovery, actually, of these ecosystems that were degraded in the past.
Amanda, can you explain that a little bit? I just didn't get it. You said that those forest plantations guarantee somehow a coexistence of monoculture on the one side and also of conservation. But what do you I didn't get the conservation part if we're talking only about monoculture. So
right, because we have a legislation in Brazil that says that every productive property or every rural property has to set aside part of its area for conservation purposes. And these conservation areas are especially important around water bodies and areas that have recharge of underwater reservoirs, of underground water reservoirs. So by law, all over Brazil, you have to set aside at least 20% of any rural property for conservation. And of course, that includes areas of silviculture and eucalyptus plantations. Now, depending on the biome that you're in, that percentage is even higher. So in the Cerrado biome that Thomas mentioned, that conservation area has to be 35% of any area that is being used for plantation. So what we have today is that we have companies that came into areas that were degraded, that were plantations, that were coffee plantations in the past, that were sugarcane plantations in the past, that were cattle ranching areas as well, very degraded, very poor practices around cattle, extensive cattle ranching that we have in Brazil. And they've installed the plantations on these areas that had been already converted and have to now set aside these areas so that you can have the regeneration of the native forest or even invest in the reforestation of native forests as well. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the landscape in general, you'll see a mosaic of productive eucalyptus plantation, commercial plantations, native areas, and also other productive practices such as agriculture and cattle ranching as well, depending on the scale.
I just realized that Victoria wants to jump in because she raised her hand. Victoria, I'm sure you represent, just to make that clear, the Economic Board of the FSC Brazil, and you wanted to jump in. We are talking right now the question was why forest plantations have an environmental value or why they help to conservation, and that's where you wanted to jump in. But now you're gone. I don't see you anymore. Where are you? There you are. Sorry.
Here I am.
There you are. Yeah, perfect. Go ahead.
Yes. So, welcome everyone. We are so glad that you're here listening to what we have to say. So, just complementing something that Amanda was saying, we must understand that here in Brazil, we have some steps that comes before the implementation of some culture. Okay, so when we talk about plantations or forest plantations or soy or any other kind of agriculture culture, we have something that is the study that relates and says what is the main potential of each area. So when we understand that, we can apply that forestry is combined to the potential of the area. So when we think about the main regions where plantations are allocated nowadays, we can see that the main potential of this area, it was dedicated to plantations. So we don't used to have only monoculture, but we do respect the potential of the area, and including soil, including climate, including all things that we need to have a very good plantation, just like we do with the other cultures that we have. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Just this complementation.
Maybe I just give the question to Dirk Riestenpat, because as I understood it, Dirk, you also have doubts about the environmental value of monoculture forest plantations. Why do you have doubts?
Hello to everybody. Sorry, as well. Well, first, I think it's important to say that I'm speaking on behalf of what I know about the plantations and what I've seen in Argentina and in Chile, especially in northern Argentina, which is which has part of the Mato Atlantico that you actually talked about, so the forested region. From what I know, management methods in those of plantations in those different countries are quite comparable. So what I would like to say at this point is that, of course, I know the argument that plantations or the management system, including plantations, needs to be looked at from a landscape perspective. But let you tell me why I still doubt this. The problem that we would face as a German forest management entity here would be that we are obliged to manage all our forested areas in compliance with the FSC standard that we have in Germany. And as far as I know, that's a rule that applies to all countries. And that's the reason for this rule is that there's no discrepancy in the management methods that you apply to the area that you own, because you're either FSC or you're not FSC. So for instance, let's say in Germany, it's forbidden to do clear cuts according to the FSC standard. So you could not have a forested area in your ownership and apply FSC standard to one part and be not complying to FSC standard on another part of your forest enterprise. So that would pose a problem. And now if I compare that to the situation of plantation and conservation in a landscape approach, that opens the same question. So why is it allowed to do something that might actually be not considered in compliance with certain rules that FSC sets? For instance, in Principle 6, there's a very strong statement in terms of environmental values and in terms of sustainability of forest management, and I have some more facts later on to that. But I think there's a discrepancy, and that needs to be solved not by the companies applying plantation rule to their ownership, but that needs to be solved within the FSC system, actually. So what I would wish for would be an open discussion within FSC about the compliance of intensive plantation practices with the standards that FSC already has in place. And I do have doubts that this is actually applicable.
Well, Amanda, I think you will have to answer to that again, since you're representing the environmental chamber at FSC Brazil. And as you can see, we doubt about the environmental value of forest plantation, especially monoculture plantations, because we know there is a problem of soil degradation. We know that especially eucalyptus, just to make that clear, eucalyptus inhibits the growth of other plants or other trees. And that's why, for example, environmental activists call those monoculture tree plantations green deserts. Yeah, which is also the title of our discussion today. So would you say we have a green desert devoid of other life, devoid of biodiversity, because it's not possible?
No, absolutely not. I think that, again, it's all a question of the quality of the management of the forest. So I'm not sure exactly which criteria that Dirk was referring to within Principle 6 that he doesn't think that are being met. But I mean, there are different forest formations obviously require different management tactics, and we try to maximize. Obviously, I mean. We try to maximize the value of the forest, both the native forest and the commercial plantation. But within the best practices possible that control soil erosion, that promote ecological corridors for biodiversity, that maintain ecological services such as water availability. So I defend that the landscape approach, especially when you're talking about a country the size of Brazil, definitely has to be the the best approach possible, so that you can meet the necessities of the people and the economy and also the environment. So I don't see, for example, how native forests could be viable in terms of providing the feedstock necessary for the different industries that depend on the wood that the planted forests provide. And going back to the green desert, again, we have within the plantations, there are different ages of plantations. They're being harvested in different moments. The best management practices try to maintain the ecological services of the area. And we even have monitoring of biodiversity, both plants and animals, within certified management units within FSC that provide ample evidence of the conservation of biodiversity and debunking the green desert discourse, I think, for the past 20 years even.
Amanda, since you just mentioned it, sorry, this question goes again for you. You just mentioned it, biodiversity. And my question is, is it possible to really have biodiversity in a monoculture tree plantation? Is that possible to get more biodiversity? I will repeat that. We have a huge water demand if we're talking about eucalyptus. We need a lot of fertilizers if we're talking about eucalyptus. And as I said already, they inhibit the growth of other plants or other trees, which of course is a problem for biodiversity. So actually, I know that Thomas Fattoya said to me before, actually, it would be very important to talk about how we can restore somehow those monoculture forest plantations. So how can we get there more biodiversity? Since you just mentioned it, you said there is biodiversity. I still didn't understand how.
Within obviously a eucalyptus monoculture, you're going to have less diversity than in a native forest. That, I think, is a given by any standard. But what we're saying is that when you have a system that provides the recovery and the conservation of native forests together with the production of wood, you reduce the pressure on native forests. So there's a reduced demand for further conversion. And you maintain important biodiversity hotspots and niches within that landscape within that area, because you have those areas that are set aside for conservation. Now, of course, within the eucalyptus plantation, you also have the transit of plants and animals, and of course, you have the monoculture management tries to reduce the overgrowth of other species. But once, if you are to recover the area after the plantation has gone through its stages, you can recover that area as well.
Okay, well, and now I saw two raised hands, actually, Dirk Riesenpat, and then I come to Victoria. Don't worry, I saw your hand. Dirk Riesenpat, you raised your hand before. Do you want to answer to that? Do you still have doubts? We were talking right now about biodiversity. Amanda says it could be possible. What do you say?
Well, just pick out two passages, actually. So the first is that the argument that plantations are actually relieving the pressure on native forests or other forest resources. I think that has actually never been proven. And if I look at the development of the forest cover of the world, I cannot see that there's actually been a relentment on those areas. Instead, there's an increasing vanishing of forests that we can still observe. And so I wouldn't let that argument stand just like that. The second one, if you talk about the application of sustainable management methods in plantations. Let me just pick out the point of erosion. So the plantations I visited in northern Argentina actually measured their erosion, or the erosion impact that a plantation management has, by a standard that they derived from a standard that was set for soya fields in the US. So now I think there's a very, very fundamental flaw in the whole system, because the measure that you, or the scale that you could actually measure a plantation or the erosion connected to plantation measurement would be the erosion that happens underneath a native forest system in the same biome. So if you take a wrong scale to prove that something's good, then of course you will be able to prove so. But still, when you compare on landscape, you have like 120, 130, 150, 200,000 hectares of eucalypt plantations in a piece. And if you apply that erosion standard to 200,000 hectares of plantations, of course, there is a substantial detrimental effect on the soils that you have there, because when you watch the plantations, you see where they actually want to return to, because even under Pinus radiata or eucalypt, you have natural regeneration of native species that are being eliminated with the harvest of the eucalypt trees. And then you apply fertilizer and you apply pesticides. So you set the whole ecosystem in a very large scale back to zero. And that, I think, could not be considered as not being harmful to the environment, if not now, then at least in the middle or long run.
Amanda, maybe just to get that point clear, would it be an option for FSC Brazil to say, okay, we leave part of that plantation, of that forest plantation, to be restored naturally. We just leave that some percentage of the area, we just leave it aside so that it can renaturate naturally. Would that be an option? I mean, to improve this problem?
You mean to reduce the total productive area?
Yes, to reduce the total productive area and say, okay, let's set so many percentage of the area aside. And because there are also environmental activists that say that even degraded lands can somehow restore naturally if you set them aside, if you leave them alone, so to say. Is that a possible option for FSC Brazil?
Well, I wouldn't want to talk on behalf of the entire FSC Brazil, but what I want to bring is that when you compare plantations with other productive units, such as soy fields, is because plantations are a productive unit. So what we're doing is that we're comparing commercial, rural activities between each other. And what we're saying is that planted forests are an economical viable solution, let's say, to providing fiber and food and shelter and building materials that are in increasing demand in the world, rather than having native forests provide that same material. So that's why when we're comparing the plantations, we're not comparing against forests, we're comparing against
productive
other,
units,
productive activities.
Okay.
So what you're saying is you could reduce the total productive area in Brazil, but you still have an increasing demand in the world for wood. So how would you provide the feedstock for that increasing demand?
Okay. So, well, let's discuss just that point the other way around. And I think Victoria could get a good answer. Let's talk about efficiency, because one of the pros of the forest plantations, we have talked about the disadvantages. And one of the pros of the forest plantations is the efficiency, which means eucalyptus grows very fast, so you can harvest earlier, and which of course has an economical.
Okay, then, can you listen to me? Okay then. So that's the main question in this virtual meetings. So first of all, Maria, I would like to just try to clarify a little bit more of what Amanda was saying, because when we think about this sector here in Brazil, when we say the forestry sector, we are the one that preserves the most in our country. And then we must make the connection with the FSC certification because it comes because of that. Okay. So considering this part that I just said, how can we blame the forestry sector if this is the one that must conserve the environment here in Brazil? How can we say that? And then coming to numbers, we have here in average that each hectare, I don't know if you can understand the hectare, but I hope so. If hectare of production means here in Brazil 0.75 of conservation area. So I don't know how can we understand that we do have a monoculture, because yes, we have a monoculture, but we do make conservation areas more than even any other sector of productivity here in Brazil. Another part is regarding biodiversity. Our monitoring, we do monitoring in all our certified areas, and what they shows to us, even though we have more than 20 years of FSC in Brazil, the only result that we have is that the biodiversity is becoming bigger here in Brazil. So that's what we have. So we must, yes, please FSC certification for this kind of results. And now, so when we talk about the monoculture, is it a monoculture? Yes, it is. It is monoculture, just like soy, corn, rice, bean,
other crops, yeah,
on any other crops.
Yeah.
But when we talk about this monoculture here in Brazil, related to planted forests, we do apply it in a mosaic. So we have all the native forests being conserved, and now so our plantation forest, that is a commercial thing. So we need to understand all these particularities that we have here in Brazil, and not only understand as a monoculture.
Yeah. Okay, I got that. I'm sorry, I was muted some minutes ago. That's why you didn't hear my question. Sorry for that. Actually, I wanted to talk with you about efficiency, because there's also one point we can say that's a pro of the forest plantation, which is the efficiency. And efficiency means that we have eucalyptus trees. They grow fast. They can be harvested earlier. They are simply to manage, and they offer higher earnings. We could say that's the positive side of eucalyptus plantations. And the thing is, are they then, if they are so efficient, are they then, Victoria, a good idea to meet the huge demand of wood worldwide? Because that's what Amanda was saying. She's saying we're talking about productive units. We have an increasing worldwide demand of wood, and we need to meet that demand of wood. And if we have very efficient plantations, could that be an option? That's the question, Victoria, right now. What would you say? We can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself. Sorry for that. You were mute. Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Even though we have this new normal for a year, we still have these moments that we forget to unmute. So sorry. The thing is, yes, when we talk about efficiency of forest products here in Brazil, we can say that yes, we are very efficient. first of all, yes, we have a fast production or faster than other countries, but also we have a diversity of products. We don't only use the wood for wood issues or wood products. We also use it for clean energy, biofuel, and also for textile things and products. So yes, we can say that here in Brazil, we are very efficient in the use of wood products based on forest plantations. We are now giving people and the consumers solutions for other matters.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Dirk Riesenberg,
Okay,
you raised
Vani.
your hand, but the question is one again. Do you also think that this efficiency, we have very efficient plantations, that's the only way to meet the worldwide demand on wood, and that maybe helps to put less pressure on all the other forests to become destroyed? Would you also agree to that? Or I think you also doubt about it.
Yeah, thanks.
No, actually.
No, it's to Dirk. I think he.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I got your point, Victoria. Thanks very much.
Okay.
This is for Dirk.
Sorry, I didn't get it. Okay.
Don't worry.
Actually, I think I answered that question already, that I don't believe in that trade-off. Now let's take a different perspective. I think what we can see is that FSC actually connects market and connects people. That's why we are here. That's why we have this debate. But what it also does, I think, is connect us in terms of responsibility for the resources that we do manage. And I think we can see this as a chance to learn from each other. So first, I think, from my perspective, Germany has gone through a long period over hundreds of years where we actually eradicated all the natural forests that we ever had here. So claiming you need to protect the Amazon might sound a little arrogant in your ears sometimes.
If you didn't protect the German forest, yes.
Yes, because but it's a bitter lesson learned, and my motivation actually is to let you share it. So what do large scale plantations or non-natural forest management lead to? Actually, it leads to a depletion of the landscape. It leads to more erosion into the rivers. That leads to less drinking water, more runoff, and whatever else you have as detrimental effects. And you can see that in your country already. So the only time, actually, it was not true. The only time I was visiting Brazil was for a day trip to the Brazilian side of the Iguazu Falls, which was very impressive. But I saw a post there from the National Park Service that actually made me very sad, because they were saying how lucky we are that we have the big dams built on the Iguazu River upstream from the Iguazu Falls, because they keep back all the silt that otherwise would dirten the water that comes down the falls, so it wouldn't be so nice to watch anymore. So what's the lesson that we need to learn here? Obviously, there's management practices in place that are not sustainable in terms of preventing erosion and preventing the pollution of rivers and all the other effects that are connected to it. So, and I would be happy if you reflect about the management methods from this point of view.
Well, I think we have talked about those effects already, basically on the environmental impact of forest plantations. And let's take the chance right now to bring Eunice in, because she's representing the social chamber, and that's why we're bringing in another aspect. And the other aspect is Eunice says, okay, we also have social effects of FSC certification, and because she said that it is very important to have that one of the achievements, of FSC is the relationship building with traditional and rural communities, because she says nationwide that actually is not working, but within FSC, we achieved to establish relationships, and actually we talk to those communities and we care about those communities. Eunice, would you say that FSC is doing a very good job here, or would you say it's just a little drop in the ocean?
Bom dia. Primeiro eu queria...
Good afternoon to all of you. Good morning and good afternoon to you and good morning to us. I would like to welcome all participants present here, and I wish that you are healthy and safe in the middle of this pandemic chaos that we are experiencing. And I wish that in the near future we can meet up personally. First of all, I would like to say that the standards regarding planted forests and also referring to traditional and local communities, that these relationships are quite robust. That means there are criteria and principles that go beyond of conflicts, impacts, etc. There are also opportunities to engage ourselves, to have transparency, to have a relationship. And this has been changing the context of certified companies like stakeholders in the communities. And it's very important to emphasize that this process exists in Brazil, and it's really benefiting. People are benefiting from it. We are a huge country with lots of ethnicities and diversity. Of course, we still can improve in several situations, specifically talking about certified companies. But of course, we are on the right track. We are looking for solutions, for alternatives, so that companies can be much more engaged and involved also in these communities that are highly impacted.
And Eunice, since you work with traditional communities and of course you have contact with them, and you said we have actually strong relationships, I would like to know, Dirk Riestpad and Thomas Fattoya, they mentioned the negative effects of, for example, eucalyptus forest plantations, that we have a problem with the water because they suck a lot of water. They need a lot of water, or in order to manage them, we need a lot of fertilizer. When you talk to those communities, are they already saying that they lack water, for example, or that they are being affected because of a very big use of fertilizers? Do you have such complaints when you work with those communities?
Yes, when I talk about the evolution of those companies, the relationships between the companies and the communities, I just want to emphasize the opportunities. It might be the case that there were these allegations and complaints coming from traditional communities, but after clarification and also the communication that was carried out between companies and the communities regarding the forest management, and also this direct contact that companies have to improve, all of these has borne fruit. That means we live in a country with a very high social complexity. And the companies these days, they are playing roles sometimes that they shouldn't play, because these are roles that should be played by the government. And the companies, they are great partners of traditional communities at the end of the day. They just bring explanation of what it means to have eucalyptus cultures in the local areas. Also regarding the principles and contexts of indigenous and traditional companies, they have changed a lot, because the companies, they have learned how to cope with it, how to act in a fairly way with them. And today, the reduction is very, very big regarding this context and this questioning of things.
Well, thank you very much for that. Now I would like to open up for the audience. We already got a couple of questions, but please feel free, if you have questions, send them to us. Please note, this is a discussion, so actually try to make short questions. That would be great if you're able to make short questions, and then hopefully we also have clear and short answers. Let's see. Amanda, there's one question. I already asked you, but Marion Kaman, she is asking it again. Wouldn't it be an option if you reduce somehow the productive unit of a forest plantation, and if you leave a certain area aside in order to renature or restoration in order to have a natural, sorry for that, to have a natural restoration. You see, what I asked before, wouldn't that be a good option? Because then we could have more biodiversity.
Well, I think not the part of reducing the productive area, but the part of setting aside an area for conservation is already being done. So as I said, at least 20% of every productive area has to be set aside for that purpose. And the forestry sector sets aside almost 1-to-1. Let's say for each hectare of plantation, it sets aside 0.7, 0.8 hectares for conservation. So that part is already being done. And that's what I mean when I say that commercial plantations are compatible with conservation efforts.
But still, you talked about setting aside for conservation, but how about setting aside for reforestation? But, not a reforestation with only one type of tree, a reforestation with different type of trees. Wouldn't that be an option?
Sure. When I say conservation, it means it's an area that's set aside, but it's not necessarily a conservation of a forest in good shape, let's say. So if you don't have any forest cover in the area, then you must restore that 20% area, or you must set aside for the natural regeneration to occur. So that in a lot of areas, because most plantations are installed in areas that were previously converted, the areas that are set aside for conservation are actually being regenerated and being restored. I would also like to point out just one more thing in terms of scale, that planted forests in Brazil are less than 1% of our total territory. So when we say that we must reduce the total area of plantations, nationwide, it's not that large of an area. And considering that it has a lot of benefits as well, that this activity within a certified system of forest management, where responsible management efforts are being put in place, are an interesting alternative to other land uses, other productive land uses that we have that many times are more detrimental to the landscape, to the forest, and to the soil as well.
Okay. We have another question, maybe to Victoria, but another question from the audience. That's a question from Johannes Zahnen, and we have met before, so I know he's working for the WWF. And he is saying that he's missing an initiative to support high quality products to stop waste of wood, because we remember we were talking about efficiency and that somehow we need maybe very efficient forest plantations in order to meet the worldwide demand of wood. And he's saying, yeah, okay, I believe that we have a worldwide demand of wood, but sometimes we have a lot of products that have a very little quality, furniture that lasts, garden furniture, for example, that has the FSC certificate and lasts only 1 year. So there's a lot of waste also going on. And that's why he says, I'm missing an initiative to support high quality products to stop waste of wood. Yeah. So Victoria, what would you say?
Okay,
how can we have an initiative to have more quality products? Difficult question.
Yes, I will answer this question. I just have to make just a little point before the answer. The thing is, another point that we need to be described is that the fact that the large companies here in Brazil, they have forestry promotion programs so that they get the little farmers, the small farmers, to be a part of the supply chain. So within this moment, we have small farmers being well conducted, even on when it comes to the productivity, and also within the conservation matters. So these companies here in Brazil, they used to stimulate these kind of new market of a clean market and bioeconomy here in Brazil. I wanted to point this out. And then when we go to the question, so sorry, I didn't get the name. So sorry at all. But the thing is, yes, we need to learn how to reduce waste. Waste of wood, waste of food, waste of everything. But when it comes to wood products and how to use them in several situations, we do have a very good thing here, mainly because when it comes to pulp and paper, we have this kind of wood, this type of wood that we will use. When it comes to furniture, we have the management that sets aside some parts of the forest, the plant forest, to be totally dedicated to furniture. And then these others small parts or the smaller parts we use as biomass or heat conductor. So we know how to use it, and we do have this here in Brazil. So when we talk about this efficiency among the diversity use of the wood, we do have it here. I really believe that I could answer the question, and if you need any more information, we can provide it.
Thanks very much, Victoria. And actually, our audience is very interested in this topic of biodiversity, especially. And that's why they keep asking questions about that, of course. So here's one question from Uli Malesa, and he's saying, he says that he can understand that FSC certified plantations in Brazil, he knows that those FSC certified plantations in Brazil have been established on land that was degraded or deforested in past times. So just to make that clear, sometime long ago. And then he says, well, and then it's understandable that you start with a plantation and maybe also with only one species. Somehow that's understandable if we say, okay, we have a forest plantation here, which is very efficient, which was established on degraded land, so to say. But in turn, to establish environmental values, what do need plantation operations to do in order to show that they take care of environmental values? So he looks at the future. I mean, we started with forest plantations with only one tree, but what would be the picture in the future? Shouldn't we change that model, Amanda?
I think that the picture that we have in the future is a more integrated productive system. So I think that that is something that we work a lot with smallholders. So as Victoria said, a lot of companies have programs where they invest in small farmers that will use a certain area of their farm, let's say, to produce eucalyptus and provide that eucalyptus for the company. And so that's compatible with other production units like a small-scale agriculture, small-scale cattle ranching, etc. And because these farmers have to provide the wood for the companies, they also have to comply with the environmental legislation in Brazil. So those areas, for example, around rivers that have to be conserved with native forests are then restored, are then protected to comply with that, with those demands. So I think that what we're looking at in the future is a more diverse productive landscape in general, where for each hectare of rural area, you have a maximized income, not only from one product. or let's say one species. But again, I'd like to point out that today, even within the monoculture, so even if you have an area that the sole product is eucalyptus wood, it's not only eucalyptus trees that you will find inside that management unit.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. And now I just got a short notice that we have somebody from the audience who actually wants to ask his question all by himself. So that means that we will open up the microphone for him. That will be Dr. Stefan Wellhofer. We should be able to hear you in some seconds. I hope that your microphone is open. And we are ready for your question. There you are. I can even see you. Perfect. Go ahead with your question.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Bom dia, todo mundo. I felt that we don't have any Brazilian forest engineer in here. So I strongly felt compelled to step in. I've been working myself in forest plantations in Brazil for a good couple of years, eucalyptus plantations. And I feel compelled to set a few things right. From what I remember from those days, 25% of the plantation area was obliged to be covered with native tree species. That was confirmed already early in the discussion, I think, and that answers the question about biodiversity. What also was pointed out earlier that I think it was Uli Malessa who brought it in, that it was on all is planted on areas that have been degraded long ago.
Long before, yes.
So it's a far improvement for those areas. And we never must forget the options would be sugarcane, the options would be soya, and compared to all the other options, eucalyptus is by far better from the ecological point of view. The next thing was, does eucalyptus take away pressure from users, from timber users, from the native forests? Yes, it does. Brazil is one of the biggest steel productions in the world, from what I understand. Brazil doesn't have any coal. So in the past, exclusively, charcoal produced in native forests has been used for all that steel production. That has been prohibited, and it's now completely fueled by eucalyptus plantations. The next point, which I would like to point out, we don't have water problems in Brazil. Contrary to the situation in Spain,
other lands,
Portugal,
yes. Mm-hmm.
There is no problem with water. So far, this might change in the future, but so far, there's no problem with water. What I also understood from my own experience in those plantations, we have an excellent networking due to the percentage of native tree species, so that we have, I don't know the right word in English, we have a net, you build a net between different biozones when you have the native tree species areas going along the rivers. So this is another function of these eucalyptus plantations. And from my experience today in timber trade, I have to point out another thing. You can't work against the markets, and you can't work against the money. You never will manage in Europe, and even less in South America. So if I can brief, my conclusion would be that eucalyptus is really one of the solutions for Brazil.
Thank you very much. There were a lot of points. If I might ask you two questions back, because you said a lot of points, okay, and Victoria's already happy about that. And since you're having your own experience, as you mentioned, I would like to ask two questions, because you said we cannot work against the money. That were the thing you said last. So would that mean that it's not possible to implement stricter rules or to try to get somehow supply chain rules, etc.? Those are models to work against the money, actually. You say that's not realistic in Brazil?
There are easier ways, there are better ways. For example, if you produce, and this is already taking place, high quality sawn timber in these plantations, you have a long-term fixation of CO2. And you put it all in automatic by itself in the right direction. You finance the protection of these 25 or whatever % of native tree coverage in these areas as well. So you have to finance it all.
Mm.
What I also forgot to point out earlier, eucalyptus is no invasive species, contrary to pinus. So these areas where you plant or keep native tree species, they are not by any means endangered by the eucalyptus. This is the contrary to pine plantations. Eliotis pine plantations, which are still pretty in vast areas in South America. Pinus is an extremely invasive species. So whatever you tree plant on its side is endangered in the long run.
Well, but still, eucalyptus is not natural to Brazil. It comes from Australia. I would like to focus on another point you said. You said that actually it's good to have a forest plantation on degraded land. Yeah, but then we also have the argument from the other side. We have environmental NGOs or activists that claim that a lot of that degraded land could be used or has a significant restorative capacity if set aside. Yeah, so we're talking about, so what kind of degraded land cannot be restored naturally? I think we have to talk a little bit more. Well, maybe I bring in Thomas Fattoya, because I remember he told me in advance that we have to look very carefully at what a degraded land is. So Thomas Fattoya, what do you think? What kind of degraded areas do we have? And is it really better to put a forest plantation there or to set them aside to restore naturally without human impact?
Acho que realmente que essa categoria de
I think this category of degradable land is very delicate, because sometimes you have to take a lot of land in different situations to put in one only culture. So we have a lot of lands, we are degradable, and we have areas that's being recovered. And all of this has to, they were considered as degradable land. So we have to define this in relation to the plantations. For example, the north of Minas Gerais, there are a lot of degradable lands. Well, it wasn't a degradable area. There was an ecosystem that wasn't understood because they didn't understand the land, the region. Cerrado, they used to think that there was a land that wasn't a fertile land, but it was a misunderstanding that we need to clarify with the situation. What are degradable lands? There are a lot of concentration of lands in monoculture, and of course you have a capital 1% of the lands in Brazil. But then if you go to certain regions, in, for example, the north of Espírito Santo, 61% of the area, it's made of monoculture So there is things that we need to understand very well. Where are the limits? There are a lot of lands which has organic laws that restricts the area from the system of monoculture. And it's, I think it's a question of managing the land in a region. For example, 61% that was taking a part in this region is a lot of land. So there are 61% of 61% of monoculture of eucalyptus, and we have to compare with the employability. So we do need to, there are a lot of conflicts about the land, the regions. So I think it's something important that we need to understand better. And the other thing that we have to highlight is the impact of monoculture in these areas. And in these areas, for example, in the north of Minas, in Paravela, there is social movements and traditional communities trying to understand the impact of monoculture, and there is a lack of water because there was a lot of problems in the areas of Cerrado.
Okay, so Victoria, you wanted to answer maybe to that region, of Cerrado? Thomas Fattoya just mentioned the problems there in that region.
Yes. Actually, this part called Cerrado, we have it here within Bahia, Minas Gerais, and Espírito Santo, very united. So they confront themselves. And we need to know that everything that Thomas was saying, yes, it does happen. It's true. He's not lying at all. But the thing is, nowadays, we have some movements that are trying to make it regular. Just like we have within the cities, the ecological zonement, so that this document that is made within the productive part, the government and the social society, it says which are the parts and areas of each city that must be dedicated to each kind of culture based on the studies of the potential of each area. And that's why we have, I can tell you that here, talking about Espírito Santo and Bahia, we have not only the monoculture of eucalyptus, we have the papaya, we have the sugar cane, we have the coffee. And why we have it? Because this is the potential of this area, including and in taking into consideration the climate here, the weather, and the soil. So what I'm trying to say is that we don't have to plant here grape because we don't have the conditions to plant grape. So that's why we have forestry, and we have eucalyptus, and we have preserved areas, and we have sugar, papaya, corn, and any other, also coffee that we do like a lot. So I just wanted to clarify this.
That we have different crops, of course, and different types of plantations. I think we got that, but still there's this question: do we need stricter FSC rules in order to set more areas aside for natural conservation or natural reforestation? I mean, that's still one big question. And one person in the chat said, well, that would be also very difficult to tell German foresters, for example, just to bring in German perspective, to tell them, hey, set aside more areas for a more diverse plantation. Of course, that would be a problem as well here in Germany. But still, once again, this very important question, because we have talked so much about it. Is it necessary that FSC in Brazil implements stricter rules in order to make those forest plantations more diverse? Do we need stricter rules here? Amanda or Victoria? Yeah.
Actually, I think that FSC needs to amplify its area of action. So it's not about stricter rules. It's about enforcing the rules that exist, not only in FSC, but in the Brazilian legislation. So I think we don't suffer from a lack of rules. We suffer from a lack of accountability in following the rules. And I think that in that context, FSC is an incredible ally to Brazil because it provides an extra set of eyes, an extra set of monitoring systems and demands. And it makes that accountability more transparent, not only to clients, but to the community and just all around stakeholders.
So you would say we don't need stricter rules, but we need to respect more those rules or completely that we have. So, and we need to create more awareness. That's what you said. I have one last question here from Jutta Buschbohm, and she's asking, the Atlantic rainforest in Brazil is a biodiversity hotspot of global importance still, even though it's a lot of secondary forest. And she says, well, today this Atlantic forest is highly fragmented. That's what we said on the beginning. Does FSC have cooperations with conservation agencies and NGOs to restore connectivity and migration corridors somehow in a planned way? Does FSC have cooperations with conservation agencies and NGOs to restore connectivity and migration corridors in a planned way? I don't know, Victoria, if you would like to answer.
Actually, the thing is, I could split this answer with Amanda, but the first thing that I could and that I should answer or repeat or explain a little better is that when Amanda said about the FSC rules, or somehow you have understood, she was talking about the laws in Brazil. But when it comes to FSC rules, principles, and criteria, we have all of them being totally accomplished. So I just wanted to make it clear. Okay, Amanda, can you proceed with the answer? Okay, thank you.
Sure. FSC doesn't go into the landscape to actually conduct restoration activities. The organizations that do that are the certified companies. So FSC within the environmental chamber has a lot of NGOs, national and international NGOs, that contribute to the governance and to the establishment of the standards and to let's say the FSC management in general, but to actually go to the ground and actually conduct restoration efforts, all of those are conducted by the company. And a lot of companies do have partnerships with NGOs to conduct these restoration efforts as well.
Mm-hmm. And then just check the chat again. We have one question also from Uwe Bentlage, because I checked the chat and people are chatting and talking about the 1994 issue. And just to make that clear, maybe we have to explain it once again here. There is an FSC rule, which means FSC only certifies a plantation if this plantation in Brazil was established already before the year 1994. That's the 1994 issue. So we just get a certification for plantations established before the year 1994, and it's also the idea that that plantation is established on degraded land or land that already has been used for agricultural purposes or cattle ranging or something like that. So FSC does not certify new plantations after 1994. I'm afraid, Amanda, this question goes again for you. How can you be sure that that rule is really respected, or are you absolutely sure that that rule is being respected? No new plantation after 1994?
Maria, actually, it's not. It's just a slight correction to your understanding of the rule. First, it's a worldwide rule. It's not just for Brazil.
Yeah.
So it's not that the plantations can't be established after, is that the conversion of the area, so the removal of the native forest, has to have occurred before 1994. So no company can be certified if they were directly or even indirectly responsible for the conversion of natural forest to any other sort of land use.
So if they're responsible for the destruction, they cannot be certified. Yeah.
Right. Or even indirectly responsible, they cannot be certified.
Yeah.
Okay. So that area can't be certified. So that's just one thing. The way that we control that is through satellite images. So there are a lot of images, satellite images, and plane images of these areas. They're available worldwide, and also interviews with local stakeholders that can attest to the date of the conversion, historical records, and that kind of thing, so that we know what kind of forest cover, what kind of vegetation cover was present in the area in 1994.
Okay, and can you be sure right now that actually that doesn't happen in Brazil? I mean, is it a rule which is really completely respected, Victoria?
Well, considering that I'm here representing the economic chambers, so I'm here representing the ones who are planting here in Brazil. So making in some kind a little more clear everything that Amanda just said, we can assure that not only us that we are here producing or planting, but also the audits that we have, that we are submitted and for our by our will. But in all of these audits, we have the satellites images being evaluated during the whole moment of inclusion of areas within our certificate areas. And also, besides the part that Amanda said, that we take into consideration all the information that we have from the population around. We also have a very strong documentary assessment, so that we have the liability of the certification, or for this verification. So we do not use only one tool; we use three. The images that can tell us and show us what it was. We use all the story and the historical scenario that we have within the population around, and we also have the documentation verification that can assure that these areas which are submitted to certification, they are not converted after 1994, and not the certified person was responsible for that.
So what I understand, that you're pretty sure that conversion is being monitored, and you have you explained about the different tools how you monitor that. Well, now we're coming. I got it.
I would
One
also
last point, sorry.
Add yes. Just the last one. I would also add that among the period of the certificate, the 5 years of the validity of the certificate, we also have this verification of the conversion areas within these 5 years.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And now we come to my very last question. And I ask you, all of you, to answer, please, only in one sentence, if that's possible, only in one sentence. It's the same question for everybody of you. And the question is, if you had the power and the means, imagine you had the power and the means to do whatever you liked. But of course, not to do whatever you liked. You have the power and the means to change one thing and to improve FSC work in Brazil. What would be the one thing you would change to improve FSC work in Brazil? It's a hard question. Let's see. Der Griechen part, maybe. You're laughing already, but you already know my last questions are tough.
Actually, I wish for FSC to start into a constructive dialogue between the members, because I have the feeling that we've raised a lot of arguments, but of course this framing wasn't appropriate to come to solutions for many of the questions that we raised. And I think we have to continue working on these questions and to qualify what FSC is actually delivering in the world. And we have to work that we have a unified opinion about what is appropriate and what is not. And it needs to be done within the FSC network, and I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, thanks very much. Thomas Fattoya, you already have your sentence. If you had the power and the means, what would you change?
No mínimo comments.
I would start discussing the situation of limits in the municipal and in terms of Brazil, because we can't have this expansion. There isn't room for too much expansion. I think we must have
Okay, I'm afraid I didn't get the last part, but I hope the audience did. Eunice, what would you change if you could, if you had the power and the means? We cannot understand you, Eunice. You're mute.
Tá habilitado. Tá funcionando agora?
Yeah, ahora sí. Ahora.
Eu enxergo como uma propositura.
I see as a proposal for opportunity, not just challenges. I think there are a lot of opportunities, and I think promoting information about the standards of FSC, I think would improve a lot of our work. And I believe in this type of sharing that we are doing today. I hope it happens more and more often, and that we can widen the horizon so other communities, other offices can understand what we are doing and what FSC represents in Brazil.
Okay, thank you very much. Amanda, what would you change if you had the power and the means? Which thing would you change to improve FSC work?
If I had the power and the means, I would increase the relevancy of FSC, not only in multiple wood-based products, but also non-timber forest products. I think that especially for the native management of forests, the FSC being recognized as a symbol of good forest management, be it plantations or native forests, is very important, because the consumer market is the one who will demand these good practices being put in place.
Okay, to be more recognized and to hopefully also change maybe a bit the consumer market or the consumer behavior. Victoria, your last words. What would you change?
Well, it was not aligned and not a combined. But the thing is, for me, if I had this opportunity, I would make a reinforcement of FSC benefits in a wider range. At the same time, investing in marketing solutions to become more popular for the public consumer at all. Because here in Brazil, the thing is, our population, they still don't know all the benefits of buying FSC products. So I would invest in that. And then we would have this whole chain totally connected. And I must say that I agree with all the solutions proposed by now.
So there were still a bunch of issues here. Well, thanks very much. We were not able to discuss all of them, but I think at least some of them. I say thank you very much to our wonderful speakers, to Dirk, to Thomas, to Victoria, Amanda, and Eunice. Thanks very much for being here. And thanks also to our audience. Thanks for being interested. Thanks for your question. And of course, I have some last information for all of you. It's just to make sure that you don't miss our last discussion, our final discussion at this conference. It will be on Tuesday, March 23rd at 4 p.m. German time. On Tuesday, March 23rd at 4 p.m. German time, there will be our last discussion about FSC certification worldwide. And if you want to find more information, of course, you can do that. It's always on the website konferenz.fsc-deutschland.de. That's the German website. And that's the moment where I say thank you very much, goodbye. And of course, please, please stay interested, stay healthy. Bye-bye.